Erin Cates.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise to speak in favour of the Government's motion to disagree with Lord's Amendment 10. As has been mentioned by other honourable members, this bill has been brought because freedom of speech and academic freedoms are under threat in our universities, and that has been well evidenced during the passage of this bill. But just briefly, as already has been mentioned, a recent report shows that 35% of British academics surveyed self-censor. Office for Students data shows that 193 speaker requests or events at English universities were rejected in 2021, compared with just 53 in 2018. And of course, there have been numerous high-profile cases of cancellation, including of Helen Joyce, the Israeli ambassador, Nadine Zahawi when he was Education Secretary. This bill is clearly very much needed. And the bill will protect academic freedoms and encourage freedom of speech on campus in a number of ways, but the cornerstone of the bill, the cutting edge, is Clause 4, the clause that the other place has attempted to remove and that the Government is rightly insisting to reinsert. Now, Clause 4 has a simple purpose. It will allow students or academics who have had their free speech right infringed to sue the university or student union that has targeted them. In other words, it will allow academics to seek rapid redress in a financially affordable way. Without this clause, the free speech protections included in the bill can only be enforced by an independent regulator, which will likely take months to resolve any disputes, or by bringing a judicial review against the university in question, which is prohibitively expensive for almost all students and academics. So, in effect, the clause provides a kind of instant feedback mechanism that will dissuade universities from acting to restrict freedom of speech in the first place. And without a tort, the student would have to resort to a judicial review with costs in excess of £100,000 to secure their rights. And if this were the case, it would be sensible to assume that the universities would be far less likely to uphold their freedoms in the first place, especially if they are coming under considerable internal pressure, as we have heard. So the tort is essential to protect academic freedoms, and I thank the Minister wholeheartedly for taking the time to listen to academics, to free speech campaigners, and for standing firm on this despite their Lordship's best efforts to move her. But the tort and its guarantee of the effectiveness of the bill is not just essential for individual academics, but it's essential for the whole of society, because it has been observed that culture is upstream of politics. And I think it's clear that academia is upstream of culture, because all the significant ideas in recent history that have influenced our culture and subsequently our politics have been birthed or nurtured on campus. From Darwinism in Victorian times, to feminism, to climate science, to important economic theories, to the rethinking of our colonial past, all once niche academic ideas that are now mainstream in our wider culture. So given the influence and therefore the power that academic thought has on society, it's crucial that ideas are tested thoroughly in the academic sphere through argument, through consideration of competing evidence, academic scrutiny, before they become accepted mainstream opinion. Without this scrutiny, erroneous ideas have the potential to lead the whole of society away from the truth. And where controversial or radical ideas might once have been thoroughly tested in this way in our universities, there is little evidence that this is currently the case, and it is having alarming consequences. For example, consider radical gender ideology, which claims everybody has an innate sense of their own gender identity that is distinct from biological sex, that only an individual can determine, and that asserts that a man who says he is a woman is indeed a woman. This ideology, birthed on campus, has taken over our culture and some of our institutions and has resulted in children being sterilised, women's rights being eroded, and male rapists being placed in women's prisons. In Spain this week, the ruling coalition will pass a bill that will allow sex reassignment surgery, the cutting off of healthy body parts, for children as young as 12. If radical gender theory had been properly challenged in universities, we would not have ended up in this sorry place. Because whilst gender identity theory is a perfectly legitimate thought experiment for academics, had there been free speech on campus, it would have been weighed and measured and found wanting. But we know from the example of Professor Kathleen Stock, a left-wing academic, how impossible it has been for academics to critique this theory because their jobs and even their physical safety have been threatened. Now, thankfully, grassroots women's organisations, desperate parents and some journalists and politicians are now shining a light on this lack of scrutiny. But the consequences of the lack of academic freedom have been serious harm to women and children. And of course, radical gender ideology is not the only destructive and unevidenced critical theory that should have been challenged on campus. Critical race theory, sex positivity, the decolonisation of the curriculum, the idea that speech is violence, all fail to stand up to proper intellectual or scientific scrutiny, and yet have become the prevailing opinions of many in our institutions. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must return to ideas and policies based on evidence and reality. This means protecting free speech and academic freedoms in our universities so that ideas can be properly tested before they make their way into society. This bill, with the inclusion of Clause 4, will bolster those freedoms and perhaps nudge us back in the direction of truth and reality.